Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Saturday, February 3rd, and today is the 120th day, 4 months since the attacks by Hamas on the south of Israel on October 7th, 2023. The most significant news in the last 24 hours is that the United States conducted retaliatory strikes in Iraq and Syria against Iranian proxies. It said in a statement that they had struck more than 85 targets with more than 125 precision munitions. So that happened last night, East Coast time. Iraq's military condemned the airstrikes as a violation of Iraqi sovereignty, warning that they would lead to Iraq and the region into dire consequences. Syrian state media reported that American aggression on a number of sites resulted in 10 killed and 18 wounded in Syria. And Iraq's government said that 16 people were killed, including civilians in its territory. So we had heard that President Biden had said that the U.S. would respond to the attacks of last weekend that killed 3 American troops in Jordan, and 36 more were wounded. And so those attacks happened last night. In terms of hostage and ceasefire negotiations in regard to Israel and Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, their chief, spoke to the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh about hostage ceasefire negotiations with Israel yesterday. According to Haniyeh's office, the two agreed that any new hostage deal must include a complete ceasefire. This is pretty consistent with what we've been hearing from Hamas officials, that any ceasefire negotiations that they would agree to would have to include a complete ceasefire. They're also saying Israel would have to withdraw from Gaza and lift the blockade on and include rehabilitation of Gaza, aid delivery, and release of prisoners held in Israel in exchange for the hostages. In addition, a senior Hamas official says the group will respond very soon to the U.S.-backed proposal that includes extended truces and phased exchanges of Hamas-held hostages for Palestinians imprisoned in Israel. And that's according to a Wall Street Journal report. It sounds like from international news, Hamas leaders are actually divided on their response to the proposal. That's the Paris proposal we've been talking about the last couple of days. According to one Lebanese Hezbollah-affiliated newspaper, they're reporting that Hamas demands the release of 100 to 150 prisoners in exchange for every Israeli hostage, for example, as a part of a 4-stage deal. So lots of different points of news. In addition, a Hamas delegation led by Ismail Haniyeh, who has been in Qatar, is due to arrive in Cairo this weekend. Ismail Haniyeh is the head of the political division of Hamas. They're said to arrive in Cairo this weekend to discuss the hostage deal, but they had postponed their visit for further consultations with resistance forces in Gaza, according to a senior Hamas official. We also know that Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is on his way to the Middle East to visit Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, Israel, and the West Bank starting tomorrow on Sunday as a part of the U.S.'s diplomatic efforts to reach a hostage and ceasefire agreement. And our prayers and support that negotiations will move forward in that regard. Our position at Churches for Middle East Peace is continuing to call for a comprehensive ceasefire. In Israel, there are continued demonstrations calling for immediate elections. So those are being held Saturday evening Israel time by the president's residence in Jerusalem, in Haifa, also near Prime Minister Netanyahu's home in Caesarea, and also in Tel Aviv. So many in Israel are protesting, calling for elections. There's also the weekly rally calling for the release of hostages at what is now being called Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. In relation to the Houthis in Yemen, the Houthi group has said that they have fired ballistic missiles at the Israeli city of Eilat, that's in South Israel near the Red Sea, and that they have threatened to keep up military operations until Israel ends its offensive on Gaza. Israel's Arrow missile defense system intercepted over the Red Sea a surface-to-surface missile that was launched from Yemen towards Israel. That's according to the Israeli Defense Forces. And CENTCOM said that U.S. forces also shot down several drones yesterday, and destroyed 4 drones that were being prepared to launch. Also, the French shipping giant CMEP announced that it will now void the Red Sea route. In terms of Lebanon news, the defense minister Gallant in Israel said that strikes on Hezbollah targets will continue even if there is a ceasefire in Gaza. He said, "We will not stop as long as the residents of northern Israel are not able to return safely to their homes." So you may recall there are 100,000 residents in Israel who've been displaced. My understanding is that that number is between both North Israel and also the communities around the Gaza border. We also know that communities in South Lebanon have had to be relocated as well because of the violence between Hezbollah forces and Israeli forces between the Lebanon and Israeli border. We also know 3 rockets were launched into Israel from Lebanon on Saturday. In the UK, British Foreign Secretary David Cameron said that he told Prime Minister Netanyahu to start talking about the things that a Palestinian state could be. Rather than the things that it can't be. And so the UK is supporting a 2-state solution. We have been having conversations. I mentioned yesterday that Axios and some news is reporting that the US may be willing to acknowledge Palestine as a state. So that's been a conversation that's happening in the United States as well. I just got an alert from Haaretz, which was why I picked up my phone, that right now there are hundreds protesting outside of Columbia University in New York City, denouncing Israel as the new Nazi Germany. Hundreds protest outside of Columbia University, chanting, "Long live the Intifada," and settlers go back home. Anti-Israel protesters have spread out along Broadway for several blocks, at times spilling into the street and blocking traffic. So it sounds like there is quite a bit happening in New York City even today. Protesters are carrying posters condemning the United States and President Joe Biden for backing Israel in its war on Gaza. Joe Biden is being identified as Genocide Joe, and they are carrying posters condemning Columbia University for not taking more severe action. So severe protests are happening in New York City right now. That was just a Haaretz alert. In addition, Canada is imposing sanctions on extremist Israeli settlers, and U.S. cities are calling for a ceasefire. The New York Times reported that Chicago is the latest city. I just mentioned the protests happening in New York, but this past week, the Chicago City Council voted on Wednesday to approve a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. It's the largest U.S. city so far to do so. The mayor broke the tie. There was a 23-23 tie to ensure the passage of the resolution. Before the council discussion, residents and activists spoke passionately about their support of a ceasefire, cheering and clapping for peers. Mr. Johnson at one point cleared the council chamber to lower the volume of dissent, while Deborah Silverstein, the council's only Jewish member, spoke in opposition to the resolution. Similar debates have been carried out in communities around the country. This issue has been particularly contentious in Chicago and its suburbs. On Tuesday, hundreds of Chicago public school students walked out of class in support of the resolution. You serve a country that is home to the largest population of Palestinians in America, Palestinians who have been here because they were exiled for the last 75 years, a resident said. For 4 months, you've heard us loud and clear, and it's a shame that it has taken us this long. There was a report about that. There are about 70 cities in the country, including San Francisco, Seattle, and Detroit, that have passed resolutions on the war, with at least 47 of those calling for an immediate ceasefire, according to Reuters. And then meanwhile, back here in Washington, D.C., it was announced today, Saturday, that the House is set to vote on a standalone Israel aid bill, which is setting up a showdown with the Senate. So House Republicans are planning to vote on a bill next week that would give billions in military assistance to Israel and U.S. forces in the region. It's a measure that's destined to come head-to-head with a Senate proposal expected to package funding for border security with aiding foreign democracies. Speaker Mike Johnson announced in a letter sent to Republican conference today, Saturday, that the House would send $17.6 billion to reinforce Israel's military defense systems and U.S. personnel and citizens in the region as a result of the ongoing conflicts. If approved by the House by midweek, the bill would be sent the second one sent to the Senate in 3 months. But unlike the previous iteration, it includes the $3.3 billion more for Israel and does not include the controversial offsets to the IRS that House Republicans championed and were considered a non-starter for the Democratic Senate. The bill would provide $9.7 billion to replenish the various missile and defense systems in Israel. It would allow the country to quickly obtain advanced weapons systems and other defense services through the Foreign Military Financing Program, and would enhance the production of artillery and munitions. Another $7.7 billion would be allotted to replenish the U.S. defense stocks sent to Israel and military operations in the region in response to the October 7th attacks, and another $200 million would be used to protect U.S. personnel and aid in evacuation of U.S. citizens if necessary. So that is an update of what's happened in the last 24 hours. And I would just say, Lord, have mercy. May we continue to work towards demilitarization, towards a de-escalation of conflict, and to call for a ceasefire and to call for peace.